Alrighty, hello everyone. So it's 8 o'clock now, so I'm going to be starting, and we'll wait for people to trickle in. Anyways, so today, in case you don't remember, so last class we kind of went over some of the more basic data types. This includes, integer, string, character, and then we talked and touched upon the concept of Boolean. Now, on face value, Boolean doesn't seem that difficult to really understand. And, in theory, that is technically true because there are only two states a Boolean variable can hold, right? And that is only going to be true and false. Well, then there comes the topic of, well, why exactly do I keep on touching on the fact that there's more to this? Well, these two states, true and false, are the basis of every single kind of decision that we as people make. In the case of, just a regular day decision making, it all really comes down to the kind of in essence, it goes down to yes or no, right? Do we want to do something? Do we want to buy something? Do we want to go somewhere? Are we going to do our homework at this moment? Are we going to go to eat dinner? All these basic questions that inside our heads we ask ourselves, but we don't externally present them, are all kind of the basis behind Boolean. Well, in this case, I'm going to be showing you how exactly we went ahead and kind of applied it into a programming language. So this is the first piece of syntax that is going to be a little bit more complicated than all the syntax that we have kind of written before, and it is going to be the if statement. So the if statement is, nothing like super complicated or anything like that. So I'm just going to go over the basis of it before I go ahead and show you the syntax. So essentially, the if statement, if you can't guess already, is if a certain state occurs, then something else can happen. It's essentially very basic decision making. There's nothing really much else to it, right? So, the most basic, type of if statements are going to be like, if X is true, then Y can happen, right? That's essentially, how we can formulate it into the English language, right? Well, in this case, we're going to start off with if, say, our variable here, Boolean value, is true. So we actually need to put this in parentheses. Is equal to true. Then that means we can say print, oops, let's not indent it extra. Let's say, system.out print line, this statement has been printed. And boom. Just like that, we've written our very first if statement. And if we were to go ahead and run this program, run file, you will see that this statement has been printed. So as you can see, there's a lot of things going on here. Why don't I move this down so we can see this a bit better? Just like that. So this piece of code all kind of belongs to each other, right? Pertains to each other. And in this case, we want to ask ourselves the question of, how does this logic work? When you go ahead and you analyze anyone's code, it's important to take this first step, because obviously if you don't understand what's going on, then you're not going to be getting anywhere. So I'll give you guys a minute to kind of guess exactly what this piece of code means, and then I'll go ahead and tell you guys. Alright, it's been a minute, so I'm going to go ahead and tell you guys what this means. So, first of all, we start off with defining our variable Boolean value, right? So essentially, this is saying Boolean value is Boolean type, and the state is set as true. That's what it means. So essentially, it is always going to be Boolean type, and the value at the moment is true. Now, nothing too complicated here. We're going to move on to our next one, right? Our if statements. If parentheses Boolean value equal true, parentheses open bracket. All right, what's going on here, right? A little bit more fancy. So we start off with the basic structure of our if statements, right? And the if statement in this case is saying if text, right, if whatever's in here is set as true, then below happens, right? This happens if this text is true. So essentially, if this is true, then this will happen. Now, we want to understand what is going on over here, right? Boolean value equal true. Like, why do I have two equal signs here? Well, these are called comparators. And comparators are essentially, as you can guess, symbols that compare values. In this case, we're comparing the value of Boolean value to the value of true. And since we understand the fact that at face value, this is not a true statement, right? Boolean value is not equal to true. We understand that Boolean value is a variable, and variables store values. In this case, Boolean value here stores the value of true, meaning that essentially instead of saying Boolean value is equal true, we can just say true equal true. And now comes the question, what does equal mean? Equal means is the value on the left equal to the value on the right. If this is the case, return true. So the only case when this equals will return true is when our left side is equal to our right side. All right? And it's a little bit confusing since we're setting a variable against a value, right? It's very important to understand a variable is just storing a special type of value. And in this case, the two values match. True when it is, in blue, when you use it in NetBeans, it will always be highlighted as, this kind of bluish text right here. Like that. And that's how you kind of know, okay, the computer now recognizes this as a Boolean value and not just, any random string. All right. Now, this is probably like the hardest part to understand about an if statement, because the rest is just kind of like, if this is true, then whatever is down here happens. In this case, I'm printing out a statement, right? This statement has been printed, this statement has been printed, so we can see that this works. that is pretty much all we have on if statements. And I'm going to go over a couple more examples after this. I just want to make sure you guys really understand this. If statements is the one logic statement you will continuously use over and over and over again, and the reason is because it is just so intuitive. This is how the human thinks, and it's the easiest way to convert it into programming words. Alright, so I just want to make sure nobody has any questions. If you do, ask them right now. If not, take this time to go ahead and really understand what is going on. Alright, so hopefully you guys kind of understand the basic structure of this. If you don't, I'm just going to go over a couple more examples, and hopefully this will solidify your I don't know, knowledge on this. It's nothing too complicated, but I can understand how it's hard to get at first. But once you get it, it's like a breeze. So let's go over another example. This time, instead of a Boolean value, we will go ahead and roll with our integer b. All right, so let's move b down here. All right, and if, important to have your parentheses and your brackets, b is equal to 3, right? Or let's keep it simple for now. System and dot print line, b is equal to 3, and our semicolon. And we can see b is equal to 3 is printed out here. And in case you guys, just want to see a fail case of this, I'm just going to go ahead and print if b is equal to 4. And you'll see that this statement right here, b is equal to 3, is not printed. Alright? Very important to understand this portion because, again, it's nothing too complicated, but it's very important to understand what's going on here. First thing we do is we go ahead and we define our variable, and then we set b as an integer, and we set the value to 3. Second thing we do, we write out our base of the if statement, just if, and our parentheses and our open bracket, and then we set our condition. In this case, it's b equal 3. All right, and then if this condition is met, then we go ahead and print this out. Now we're gonna do something a little fancy. Since this is an integer, meaning that we are gonna be able to play around with our greater than and less than operators, which are our little arrows. All right, this one is less than or equal to, and we can see that this statement still runs. Right now, if we were to remove this equals, however, you will see that this has failed. All right, so the different operators in if statements are less than, greater than, less than or equal to, greater than or equal to, and not equals to. All right. In programming, our exclamation mark means not. This is almost exclusively used in our if statements logic portion, and the reason for that is because everywhere else the not can be written out as the other case instead of just, not true, you just write false. Not false, you write true. I mean, Boolean is really the only reason why you would ever use that, this special case. So once you go ahead, familiarize yourself with all these different operators. I'll give you guys a minute for that. Alrighty, so now we're gonna go ahead and play around with this a little bit, right? So there's nothing really special with all these operators here. I mean, we can try the not equals to here. That one's probably the most fancy one out of all of these, and we can see that that is not printed. Alright, so now that we've kind of done this, I want you guys to understand that this statement here can be modified in kind of any way we want it to be. And what I mean by this is, over here we can say b times 2 is equal to 6, right? So 3 times 2 is equal to 6, so this should print out true. And we can see that this statement does in fact print out. So this is where our if statements get a little bit tricky. We have our base, kind of statements where it's just like, alright, there's nothing too special here. It's just, if a variable is equal to a certain value, or in the case of our integer, if it follows a certain, test, less than, greater than, not equal to, alright? But it is also extremely important to understand that we can manipulate both sides of our expression, right? This is called an expression. And in this expression, both sides can be modified. There's really no reason to modify the right side unless you have a variable there as well. You just keep it as the value. There's no reason to write out 3 times 2, even though it does equal to 6, right? But it is important to understand that you can manipulate variables, right? We can even go ahead and if c was an integer, we could do b times c is equal to 6, right? And it's really, there's no limits to this side of it. And this is where if statements start to get a little bit challenging, because it's not something easy to grasp onto because of how abstract the concept of an if statement is. But I'm sure once you guys go ahead and start your projects, that kind of stuff, you will understand how easy it is to kind of come back to an if statement because of how closely it follows to the human logic. Alright, so we're now going to go through another example, and then I'm going to walk you guys through it. So this time we're going to be playing around with our string. For the sake of this, we're going to create a new string, and we're just going to call it string like that. And the contents are going to be string. So our if statement is going to be if string is equal to string, just like that. Right? Print string is present. There we go, and we can, oh, I just realized that is not correct. We want to print the line. There we go. And now it will run. Alright, so we can see it says string is present. Now, I want you guys to go ahead and think over, is there anything special about a string, and make sure you understand how this part of the if statement works. So I'll highlight that for you, and I want to make sure that you guys understand that portion. I'll give you guys about a minute for this. Alright, so now we're going to kind of go over what's happening here. So our string here, our name is str, right? Which is string. So the typing is going to be string. And again, this is a special typing because we can call methods or functions off of it. And then our value is set as string, right? So, it's a pretty basic variable defining, right? Next we move on to our if statement. Nothing special here, right? We check if string is equal to the str variable. For the sake of this, str is going to be abbreviation for string, and it's something that I use very commonly if I'm too lazy to come up with another name. Your variable name should always be relevant to whatever items you're storing in it, and it's just easier to track. Now, this is where it gets a little bit complicated, right? I mentioned the modification of, the expression inside there. Now, it's important to understand that not only can you go ahead and do your, multiplication, division, and that kind of stuff, you can also call methods. In this case, we have, dot car at, and I'm just gonna, do this exact same thing here. Dot car at, and we're just gonna check at, say, 0, and if it is s. Ooh, it's not liking something. I'm not too sure what it is at the moment. There we go. It didn't like the typing. So, in case you didn't see what happened there, this double quotes means the string type, right? Single quotes indicates character typing. Very important, right? In Python, you can switch between the two. It doesn't matter. Java, it does matter. All right. So we can go ahead and run this now. And we can see that this works. All right. Just to work this through with you, string right here. All right. Dot car at 0 means our very first character, and our very first character is s, and it matches like that. Therefore, it can go ahead and pass the if statement. All right. This can work. Very important to hear this. This can work with any method. All right. And when you go ahead and you start creating your own classes and objects, it can work with your own special methods as well. It can be something like, reverse the letters, take them out, put them into a list, order the list from least to greatest, order your letters from least to greatest, stupid things like that, fancy things, whatever you want to call them, right? You can do all of that with your methods, right? Inside this tiny little expression here, right? It's important to not get locked by, I don't know, the limits you may place on an if statement, as it is obviously, programming language, not easy to get, all that kind of stuff. I understand that, but it is also very important to remember that whatever you can think of in real life, any sort of logical statement that you want to put out there, it is perfectly possible for a program to kind of recreate that situation, and then obviously spit out a decision. At your level of programming, at the moment, you are stuck with very basic knowledge of if statements. You're not going to be able to go too far with it, but as we move along, you'll learn a bunch about if statements, right? And I will go ahead and expand upon this idea of if statements in 1 second before we wrap up. But just remember that a lot of things are very achievable. You just need to take a bigger look at the picture. Take a look at the bigger picture. So now we're going to go ahead and introduce you to the idea of else, right? If statement is, I guess that's technically the correct way you put it, but really most times you're going to be using as an if-else statement. And essentially this else case means everything else, right? If this condition happens, then blah blah blah. If this condition is not met, or else essentially, then blah 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 will happen, right? So it's essentially covering all possible cases by kind of using this format of if else, right? So now we're going to go ahead and write out else, right? And we're just going to add it along to this, and we're going to say else has happened, right? And we're going to try out our else statement here, right? Well, not really an else statement, but just else, right? And we can see else has happened because our first character right here is not a Z, it is an S. All right. Nothing really too fancy with the else statement. There is no logic you can add to this. Okay? Very important to understand that you cannot add logic to an else statement. However, you're probably like, wait. What happens if I want to, if I want to edit this? If I want another case, right? Say if favorite color is blue, right? Then say, oh, your favorite color is blue, but what happens if I also want to check if someone's favorite color is red? There is a special case for that, and we will be going over that next class. For this class, we don't have enough time. We only have 2 more minutes, and we will be sticking with the else statement. The else, the logic of the else essentially means everything else, right? Just like our kind of not that we had at the over here, where it's not equals to, that's essentially what your else statement is, right? It's essentially the not equals, but it's not really not equals, it's just not, right? And you can play around with a lot of these things, right? For example, I'm pretty sure you can just go ahead and say not all of this, right? So essentially what this means is that whatever this prints out or returns, it reverses it, right? So before we saw that it went ahead and it did not complete it, but now that we've added this not over here, you'll see that it will revert, and it will say string is present, meaning that this if statement has been completed. Now you're probably like, oh my god, you just threw so much at me, right? I kind of did, right? But I don't fully expect you to understand this part of it. However, I'm going to try to explain this logic to you before we go. So essentially, first of all, it checks if the first character is equal to our Z here, and in this case it is not because our first character is S. Now you're like, wait, yeah, you go to else, right? Not quite. We threw in this not here because now that it's done this equals can only return 2 things, true or false. and it will always be if true, then blah blah blah, right? If we are to write a if statement and just say true inside of it, then it will just go through it with it, because that's all it's looking for. It's looking for true. In this case, if prints out false, and we reverse this by saying not false. Well, if we said not, not 1, then that wouldn't work. But in this case, it does work, because the only other case in Boolean is true. So not false is equal to true, right? Just like how not true is equal to false. Nothing too special about that relationship. All right. Hopefully that didn't confuse you too much. We will be going over the rest of if statements hopefully next class, which is quite a lot, and it gets into a bit more of the complicated portion of it. If you want to do a little more research, it's called nested ifs and else if. All right. Other than that, I don't have anything else for today. If you have any questions, feel free to email them, ask them right now. If not, I will see you guys next week. All right. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you guys next week. Bye.